about that. So if we didn't create a bank here, it would be a parking lot. Say.
I mean, it's definitely, he has a point there, but he's also fracking on his property. And there's still a lot of environmental concerns with the fracking industry as a whole, as far as ground stability. Um, if your well leaks and you have some of that fracking fluid get out into the wetland, you're pretty much going to destroy the point of the bank. And you could just sabotage, and there's who's to say that he'll go back and mitigate the damage from that he did in his bank because there was a fracking leak.
Right. So for those of you who didn't read the article, the guy who was a UT Regent, who's a bad dude. Everyone pretty much knows he's a bad dude. He's created a wetland mitigation bank, but he's also fracking underneath it. And I also like this article because what Rob and I were talking about, who owns the mineral rights, he's decoupled the mineral rights from the surface use so that he's making millions fracking, and he's also making millions calling it wetland restoration. Interesting concept. As an entrepreneur, I like it. Ewan, can you mute your speaker? That's better. We're getting feedback from you. I'm getting feedback from you. Do you think those? Well, I don't think Harrison believes the two uses are compatible, but could they be? Are there compatible multiple uses with these mitigation banks? That makes sense? Is it wrong to make so much money off of this concept?
Well, it depends on what you're doing at the surface. I mean, if you're fracking and it requires, destruction of land so that you can get to the oil, and also it requires a lot of water and other resources to get to that oil or shell underneath. Looking at the pictures, I mean, that to me is not holding up your end of the deal when you say I'm holding this area as wetland restoration area, but I could see like this big swath of land where he paved over, albeit maybe temporary, but what is he doing in the meantime to that ecosystem?
Which is a good point, because another thing I would change in these laws is there's no real monitoring regulations. There's no real ecological assessment and reporting requirements. That would be the first thing I would change. We don't know if these wetlands are successful at all. I think there's probably cases where mitigation banking makes a lot of sense because you're offering a profitable use to the land in such a form that it's potentially ecologically beneficial versus a parking lot or a commercial strip center, which we're so good at making in Texas. But on average, it seems like without these changes to the regulations and the intent of these programs, we're just creating instances where developers are making money without having to develop. I mean, that's what the article basically says. It was interesting at the end of the article, the reporter was trying to reach for some level of impact resulting from this bank, and they talked to some property owner who's kind of wedged in between two tracks, and I think it was she, was talking about flooding. Now we're flooding more than ever. And they tried to make it sound like, well, they did something to change the drainage patterns. Well, they made the land a wetland more so, right? They're making it wetter. So to me, that would be the case for more instances of flooding because it's wetter. but I think that's almost okay. Not for the woman who owns the property, but if they really wanted to make an argument, it should be around the lack of functionality on this mitigation bank, water quality issues resulting from the fracking beneath it, um, or something more of a negative consequence ecologically than some drainage changes, which you don't know what that's from. Usually a single raised road is not going to completely, it can, but usually not going to completely alter the drainage patterns. I thought that was an interesting comment that the reporter tried to work into the article, which I didn't buy it. I didn't agree with that part.
Sure, but has there been any studies on what you do subsurface affects everything on the surface, as far as look at what's happened in Oklahoma with all the earthquakes and the
Yeah, I mean, realistically, you're injecting massive quantities of water into the subsurface, right? And
sure.
God knows what else. So it was probably a water table issue. They raised the water table, and so when you do get more runoff and rainfall, there's less infiltration. Ground is already saturated, and it's saturated higher up, so you're going to get more ponding and sheet flow on the surface. As far as I know, that's never been studied. There's so much politics with this fracking that nobody wants to study it because of the people are just afraid. And all the studies that have been done, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are sponsored by industry. Let me tell you, working just for the federal government, they're bad enough where they want the results they want. I can't imagine working for industry when it's like, if you don't find what we want, we're gonna, either discredit you or put a gag order on you, or you're not allowed to publish it at all. We own you. I just couldn't imagine doing that, but people do it all the time.
Hmm.
I think this article has if there's one thing you read in the next month, it's this, because it has implications way beyond just this mitigation bank as a tool. It delves into private property rights, the whole idea, the grand notion of including humans in nature and having these multiple objectives. When you play it out, it always doesn't work the way the books, the texts talk about, particularly at the parcel level. And these are not small parcels, these are very large parcels. It gets into education and perceptions. It gets into this whole beyond a single parcel thinking, what's happening outside the parcel. And more, environmentally, we're choosing to look at more of these arrangements where, whether it's trading carbon credits, it's impervious surface taxes. On the other end of the scale, it could be impact fees. Some of these tools can really work, but when they're put in the situations where it's not appropriate, it can probably cause more harm than good. All of these issues you're going to have to deal with when you graduate and enter some kind of job market. You work in Texas, you're going to probably run into this fracking issue. You're going to probably run into this mitigation bank issue. There's some mitigation banks where they're not actually restoring wetlands, they're existing hyper wetlands, they're just calling them banks and selling the credits. It's a beautiful concept. The guy in the article, he calls it mailbox money because he's not really doing anything except for planting some trees, but he's collecting the money. I think if you made it a more genuine ecological endeavor, it would cost a lot more, and you'd see less of it. I know, right? It's a really interesting article to me. Something for everybody.
So
And
the
also,
Corps of Engineers allowed him to go back and decredit some of his land just to put in those roads? I thought
yeah,
once it's identified or once you sell those rights, you can't develop it. That's the whole principle behind
yeah, I, I don't know. Then you're
money.
getting into politics and money. The guy's very influential. Um, has a lot of political connections. So again, that's I like it because it's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, it's a kind of a balance. So it looks like between TxDOT and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as one manages the system and the other one uses the system. You have a
There's
federal agency and a state agency.
there's a very strong tradition in Texas of um, the government giving money to the private sector in some way, whether it's through contracts or arrangements like this. And a lot of it is politics. The General Land Office almost prohibits money going to places like A&M and UT. Instead, they go to companies like Camp Dresser McKee, big engineering firms, um, even if it's and when it's usually much more appropriate to go to research institutions. Um, that's just the way they roll.
Is that what they're proposing here at Texas A&M in College Station as well, is fracking in some locations underneath the
I,
campus?
I think, I don't know. I haven't heard that issue. I'm sure it exists, particularly in College Station, more than Galveston. I don't think there's going to be any fracking on Pelican Island anytime soon.
Did you
But
see emails or something? Wasn't there an email or something from the president of the campus? No, about fracking on campus. I'll see what I can
Rob's our resident researcher
find.
for those issues. The other issue is, okay, forget about wetland mitigation banks, if I'm told. Say we've got a conservation easement, or we've got transfer development rights, or conservation overlay. All these things we want to do to in certain areas to maintain the ecosystem integrity, and then someone can come in and frack it. So why bother? And fracking is huge business all over the country. So that subtle um, rule that okay, the mineral rights can be owned by somebody else can be the undoing of a lot of environmental surface activity. And how you deal with that, I have no idea. In fact, I've never even discussed it in this class. Rob's the one that brought it up.
Sorry.
And maybe in some ways, if you're dealing with some kind of habitat, um, maybe fracking can coexist. If you're talking about water quality, I've got some questions or noise disturbance or whatever. And I think the most heinous uh, violation is, you know, calling it wetlands, but you really got a concrete pad that's fracking. That doesn't make sense to me. The other thing is they can go in underground laterally for a long way, so you can have, I guess theoretically, a park um, on the surface or a nature preserve, and they can be fracking underneath it. If they're far enough away, if the pad site's far enough away, if it's a mile away, 2 miles away, and they're going in, it's more expensive for them, but they're going in horizontally. I guess it's possible. This will be a great master's project paper. The compatibility of fracking and ecosystem planning. But you got to watch your back. So the second issue I want to talk about is everybody's final paper and where you're at on that. So some of you I know have talked to you about your individual projects. Others have no idea what you're doing. So now is a time to share with the rest of the class what you're doing and to me, and bring up any issues or questions that you have. I can tell you it's to your advantage to participate in this discussion, because the more I know about your paper, the more leeway I tend to give. If you have a particular issue you can't overcome, if I know it going in before I read it, you'll get treated better than if I had no idea what your situation is and it's just missing from your paper. So I know that Harrison and Katie are doing a bang-up job because they're doing the East End Lagoon of Galveston Island, and they've got, which is what, 800 acre area?
Just about.
And they've been studying it to death in other classes, so they're going to have an amazing fact base. They know all the stakeholders because they're working with them, right? There have been plans written for that area before that they can dig up. Other classes have looked at it. So for them, and it's local, I'm expecting great things. Great things, hundreds of pages, who knows.
Hundreds.
A web atlas of data.
Is it like,
By the way, I never got a thank you from Merrill for doing that, getting that up on the web so quickly. He owes me big time. He's going to hear about it. Yeah, Helen's like, yeah, that's great. I'm not going to do it. There's no gratitude. So Bella and Emily, what are you guys doing?
I picked a forest ecosystem so far, and yeah, I'm still trying to gather data.
So you're choosing that the forests around near Conroe, north of Houston, that also has been studied a lot, and there should be data from the Forest Service and all that land cover data. You know where to get from viewers, and there's been a lot of work there. The other thing is, everything may already have a plan. I think I talked about this before. That's almost a good thing, because it's an opportunity to fold in elements from existing plans potentially into your plan. I've never seen a plan without major weaknesses, so it's an opportunity to build on what's been done, but fill the gap in terms of weaknesses. Usually your plans are bigger than the existing plans so that you can scale up from what exists. Your Conroe issue, your forest plan, sprawl is going to be a big issue. Sprawl reduction techniques around that area are a big issue. Water supply issues can be important up there, particularly around Lake Conroe. The drought really hurt a lot of areas up there, and also Houston, when they feel like they need water, they just take it. Lake Conroe was set up as a reservoir for Houston years and years ago. And so when Houston needs water, they'll drain that lake, and then there are all kinds of ecological implications up there, which happened a couple of years ago. What about you, Emily?
I'm looking at doing the Edwards Aquifer region, kind of Austin area. I know there's a lot of courses and information there.
I've had numerous students in this class do that for their plan. Areas around Barton Springs are really sensitive, really important. There is a plan for Barton Springs. There are aquifer-based plans, but they tend not to look at the stuff we do in this class, like development.
Okay.
The more you can be spatially specific in your plans, the better. Just like the first problem paper. What about Rob? I don't even know what you're doing, Rob.
Oh, I thought we were exempt. No. Myself, Win, and you, Win. We're all going to do the Upper Bear Upper Bear Creek watershed that's on the edge of between Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah.
Nice.
It's kind of feeds into the Yellowstone National Park.
And the Grand Basin watershed.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Grand Basin watershed. It's one of the watersheds that we found more information on than we started with trying to do something with Death Valley watershed, but we
There's no water.
There's no, but there was at once, but there's not anymore. It's I found it interesting. I tried to find as much as I could, but there's just not a whole lot of information. There's not a lot of active groups that are participating in it. So Wynn found this one, which I was particularly interested in. It's not the Yellowstone watershed. It's not that big, so that it's too difficult. And I think it'll allow us to focus on a lot of those trans-boundary issues and jurisdictional issues between states, as well as different counties. Just looking at that.
How did you decide on this watershed? That area of the country?
It's just I brought up Yellowstone after Death Valley didn't really work out, and then Yellowstone just still looked to be too big of a project to take on in the short amount of time that we have left.
It's on the south of Yellowstone.
So it's on the south side. Yeah. So it's just on the border of Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, right there at that corner or that intersection of those three states.
I think it's interesting that we cross state watershed.
So we got some research to look at to see how those three states address this watershed.
You may want to tap into some of the gap analysis data for that, depending on how big the watershed is. What about who else is left? Gargi? Gargi there?
When last time you were here, me and Anika talked to you about the Sundarban area, which falls in India and Bangladesh. So so even SIMA is included now. So we three are planning to go ahead with it. So we find it really interesting because it falls in two countries, and actually, one of the major problems in that area is because it falls in two countries and there is a lack of coordination. So apart from the coordination, there are also other problems in Bangladesh as well, which is environmental education. That's a big issue to it, right? And we try to find what are the plans existing for Sundarbans. We found one which was founded by USAID. So we will take that as our base, and then we will try to work on that.
How hard is it going to be to get data for the factors?
Yeah, that was what we were also thinking about. There are some data on the rivers that flow through Sundarban, the salinity, the tidal range, those things. But the water-related data I can get, but I'm not sure if we are attempting to do anything else right now.
The species or
the species
are not
habitats,
proper documented.
Yeah, those.
Okay, well, do the best you can. I'm expecting your plan to be really strong on collaboration and communication. I realize as we've talked about, the fact base of your plans are going to set the tone for everything. So if your issue is water quality, when you identify your problems, that's going to lead to the specific goals, objectives, and policies. So being focused is, I think, okay. That's somewhat preferable than trying to cover the world. That's one of the big pitfalls of this class, is people are afraid to focus, but I think that's going to make for a tighter, more integrated plan. You've got the environmental, ecological, physical characteristics, the socioeconomic characteristics, the intersection between the two is where you're going to get
Oh. Hello.
Welcome. Up your back. I disappeared for a second.
Yeah.
That was terrifying. What was I saying?
The intersection between the two.
Right, so that's where you'll then identify your problems, whether it's sprawling development, fragmenting habitat, water quality issues, um, what have you, specific species. Then you jump on it with your specific goals, objectives, and policies, and it becomes much more coherent. And we don't see a lot of, in this class, we don't see a lot of focused plans because a lot of them are these comp plans where you're supposed to cover the world. And they just get, some of them say, that's fine, but we're going to focus on these areas. Some of them try to cover the world. I think they're huge plans, like Sarasota, and maybe less effective in the long term. The other thing is, being spatially specific, whether it's a street intersection or, you can draw it on a map. This area is where I want to focus my development density. This area I want to protect. Even if they're crude hand-drawn maps, I prefer that than not getting really down into the weeds of your specific system. And I'm expecting you've looked at this all semester, and so you know these places fairly well, whether that's the case or not. And we now have the technology to get. I see you. You're interrupting my graduate seminar. You can say hi.
Hello.
Here.
Wow, looks like you cut off your arm and stuck it in a plant and grew your son.
That's kind of what happens, Class.
You have no homework? You have more homework.
Everything he says.
You have to read 10 books and then do 100 papers.
10 books.
100 burpees?
100 burpees. Oh, there's my wife. They're everywhere. Of course, I'm sitting in the middle of the house. But yes, class is dismissed on that note. A little early today, but get a jump on the holiday. Travel safe. We're gonna meet again on. I don't know how to say this.
Monday.
We're gonna meet again a week from today. No class on Wednesday, and on the syllabus we're gonna be back on track, right? Do I do the magic or what? Back on track on the syllabus? That's when you thought it was completely out of control? No, we're going to talk about plan conformity, which is really plan implementation. And I really want you to read chapters 10 and 11 of the book. They're based on an article that I'll also present to you, where we looked at the degree to which these environmental plans are actually being implemented with disturbing results. Now, there is someone among us who I think should contribute to this with their own thoughts, and that would be Katie, because she was still thinking about looking at this issue, right?
Yes.
Implementation, and maybe you can chime in on what you've been finding and working on, or at least thinking about.
Okay, yeah.
Because we essentially did that. You saw the article at this point. We did what you're doing. You're just doing it in a more modern way than we did it a decade ago. One of the most underemphasized aspects of this whole endeavor, environmental or something else, housing, transportation, is implementation. And I have these arguments with Bill Burke, who kind of gets offended when I say, I don't think plans are working because they're not being implemented. Like, have I taught you nothing in your career? But it really worries me that planning and these types of policy initiatives and not really making a difference. And why aren't they? And where are they not making a difference? I should probably give that more time in the course, but 2 days is all we have. So now that people are always walking in on my
Corridor.
now I am sitting literally in the dining room of this house, so that's not my house. So, but on that note, go home early. Make sure you eat too much this weekend. Watch some football. Work on your final papers. We're gonna grade, right? We're gonna grade your problem papers. So I'll probably have those back by Monday. That's my dad over my left shoulder. What he look like in 30 years.
Collaborating.
He still has his hair, so what else can I say? He was actually he did development. He did like schools and wastewater treatment plants. He indirectly got me into this business. All right, so I'll see you guys in a week. If you need me, if you have any issues with your final paper, email me. I'm always on email.
Regarding the final paper, how big, I mean, what's the scale of this paper that we're looking at? Because we saw
I gave you a guide of like 25 pages, but I've gotten a lot more than that, particularly with appendices. So I will read whatever you give me. This is 40% of your grade, so I think 25 pages would be on the low side.
yeah.
It's hard to, I've got, like we've read in this class, there's great plans that are 25 pages and crappy plans that are 150 pages. I think with the data, for fact-based, more is probably better. I think, you get 3 or 4 good goals, and then you have a whole line of objectives and policies under that, is enough. Make sure you include references, if you have any, at the end. I think Reja did a really good plan, so he can give you some insight. I know Helen did one, too. I actually have hers. I can pass that around if she gives me permission. I can find it. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll pass around an example from a final paper.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll work on that. If I don't do that in the short term, someone bug me.
Okay.
Do it.
If you don't provide the example, maybe just like a rubric of what your expectations are, so that we know we're hitting all the
Greatness. You've got the 5 components. Greatness on every one.
Perfect.
You've seen so many examples of plans in this class. You just went, I purposely gave you this exercise so you can look at, I think both of those are pretty decent plans. They were comp plans, so they were jurisdictionally based, but I think they're pretty good. I've never seen a perfect plan because they come out of this participatory, ugly process of conflict. You guys have the benefit. You don't have any conflict. You can write whatever you want. Try to keep an eye on reason, but you don't have to have a watered-down product because it's an exercise. All right, so now there's fighting behind me. I'm going to let you guys go. Any other questions? You good? Okay. Have a good holiday. Be safe. And Helen, you wanted to talk?
Yeah, for a minute if you have it.
Okay.